What are the threats to academic freedom in the EU and worldwide? How can it be protected? Why is it essential for democracy but also economic competitiveness? And what impact could the digital transformation have? Welcome to the European Parliament Panel for the Future of Science and Technology, STOA's podcast, on the annual Conference on Academic Freedom. In the European Parliament's vast library, amidst hundreds of books and research materials, academics, experts and political decision makers have gathered to discuss a fundamental value for democracy, one that's also essential to the EU's economic competitiveness. Roberta Metsola, President of the European Parliament.
We talk a lot, and increasingly so, unnecessarily so, about Europe's competitiveness, about how we need to stay ahead in the global race for innovation, and this will be the main focus of the Parliament's new legislature. But let's be honest, without academic freedom, there is no competitiveness. This isn't just about science, this is about Europe's economy, and it's also about our continent's place in the world. If you look at the figures, countries that produce academic freedom produce more patents, they attract more investment, and they drive more innovation. It is ultimately no coincidence that the world's most dynamic economies are also the ones that protect scientific independence.
Academic freedom is a major asset for the European Union, but it's in danger from pressure on funding, political interference, or even violent threats against scientists. Since 2022, STOA has published the annual European Parliament Academic Freedom Monitor, which identifies emerging risks. For the first time this year, the monitor included an overview of the constitutional provisions in EU countries by Professor Vasiliki Costa and Dr. Olda Tseran from the University of Leiden. Peter Marsen from the University of Oslo is one of its authors.
There are a number of developments when it comes to funding higher education, when it comes to the growing role of social media being used for attacks on academics, climate change, other topics. When we look at emerging security issues, artificial intelligence, so there are all kinds of new areas that have emerged that potentially form a threat to academic freedom. So each of them individually doesn't represent a crisis, but if you take them together, then it's a source of concern.
In response, the European Parliament is pushing for stronger legal protections at the European level. MEP Christian Eller has been the chair of STOA since March 2022.
What we want to do is that we, at least in the field of the freedom of science, we have a solid legal base. There's a challenge because in the treaties we are in charge of the scientific freedom, but we are not in charge of education. So that's a starting point, but in perspective we want to have a change of the treaties, and we want to have it in the treaties as a kind of basic, almost universal right.
The European Commission has launched a study on research freedom in the EU's 27 member states and 5 other countries which score highly on the protection of scientific freedom. The results, expected to come out by the summer, will help inform a legislative proposal as part of the European Research Area, or ERA, Act. Ekaterina Zaharieva is the European Commissioner responsible for startups, research and innovation.
But while Europe remains a leader in scientific freedom, we are not immune to challenges. The Academic Freedom Index shows a declining trend in the European research area since 2008. Without independent research, we risk losing the public trust, which is very high actually in science. So my goal for the mandate ahead is clear: to make Europe the global leader in free and open research. To this end, I fully support the European Parliament's resolution on protecting the freedom of scientific research on January 2024.
But for Peter Marsen, strengthening the protection of academic freedom requires a broader approach.
The European level, what can be done to make sure that the conditions for academics to work within their universities, their colleges, their research institutes are more or less the same, so that we don't have EU member states with serious problems around academic freedom and others not. So in the security area, you could imagine that we have one set of European rules and guidelines for dealing with security issues and finding a balance, appropriate balance with academic freedom, instead of leaving it to each EU member states. But there are other areas where it's better to look at the national context and to allow the politicians and others involved, the academics, to find solutions to specific national problems. And then we have the institutions, where I think one of the important issues is communicating better with society about the importance of academia in general and academic freedom, how it's linked to democracy.
This year, the high-level conference also looked to shed light on threats to academic freedom at a global level. Kristina Meinecke-Schalev is the regional representative for Europe at the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights.
There's increased surveillance, increased interference, increased self-censorship also by academia, going ahead with certain research topics, which before were maybe not so questionable, be it on structural racism or around gender, etc. So this is worrying in all countries across the world. I think the United Nations looks at it exactly in the 193 member states who have ratified human rights treaties. And I think we see difficulties there everywhere, especially I think now in relation to students also and their protection, their participation in protests, unions.
But how can the European Union support academic freedom beyond its borders? MEP Christian Eller, Chair of STOA.
In practical terms, I mean, we have to reach out even globally. We have international corporations. We have to think what is, let's say, how cooperation with a third country is somehow also reassuring that academic freedom with our partner is in the right way also accepted. I mean, a practical example, we have a cooperation with Singapore. Yes, we should mention with the Singapore government academic freedom if they want to join a European program.
Kristina Meinecke-Schalev also worries about the challenge posed by the digital transformation.
It can be used for the good, to improve on research, including on human rights work as well. But also it has its harms and can perpetuate already the threats that civil society and academia, students, you and me face.
According to Peter Maassen, strengthening academic freedom must also involve universities themselves.
And they are the gateholders, so they play a central role. And I think one of the key issues of contestation at the moment is who should have the responsibility for guarding and protecting academic freedom. And there are, let's say, some doubts in the political system that the universities should have. That's why I think the universities should strengthen the arguments they use to have that central role, where they both protect but also support and promote academic freedom within their institutions, but also be the kind of voice of the academics, the students in society, in order to make sure that society understands the importance of academic freedom.
Through initiatives like the EP Forum for Academic Freedom, STOA is working to ensure a fundamental right remains protected for future generations. Thanks for listening to STOA's podcast. Stay tuned for future events.